viewers, my name's Cara. I'm just gonna talk at the camera for a little bit because Mercury retrograde? Maybe? So, here's the thing. Let's talk about Mercury retrograde. Tell me in the comments how you feel about Mercury retrograde. So, for those of you who don't know a lot about Mercury retrograde or retrograde planets and stuff like that, all of the planets retrograde at different times and for different lengths of time. It's based on the pattern and length, the size of their orbit around the sun, and it's all about how we perceive the planet's path, the orbit that they take, from Earth. So retrograde motion is when, from Earth, looking out into space, tracking the path of the planets, it appears that it is stopping and turning and going the other direction, and then stopping and going the same direction again. But it's really just because of the way we see it from Earth. They're never actually like, stop, back up, and then go forward. It's always going in a circle. It's just the way that we all, the way that we all orbit differently around the sun makes it look like the planets are, for a time, going backwards. Like, it's making a little loop. All the planets retrograde, but mostly we only hear people talk about Mercury retrograde, and why is that? And we've talked about Mercury retrograde years ago on the PaganPerspective collab channel. But basically the biggest reasons are because of the areas of our life that Mercury rules. Mercury rules things like communication, technology, travel, and so these are really big things. So you'll hear people say, or you'll read articles from various places that, they want to get a lot of likes and a lot of shares, so everybody writes about Mercury retrograde and what you should not do during this time, right? So you'll be advised to, not start new projects, not sign any contracts, not make any large purchases, big ticket items. And things that you do want to do during this time would be things like finishing up projects that have already been started before, and you want to take extreme care to be very clear in your communications with other people so that nothing can get misunderstood, because communication is likely to have issues during this time. Similarly, technology is likely to have issues throughout this time, and issues surrounding travel. So don't plan any big trips, things like that. This doesn't mean do not leave your house, do not talk to anybody. Obviously, hello. We live our lives day to day, people not even knowing what Mercury retrograde is or when it is, and we live perfectly fine lives, okay? The communication, the technology, the travel, the legal stuff, it's things that when they go wrong in your life, you notice, right? You really notice if you have a miscommunication with someone, if your technology breaks down, stuff like that. The other reason that Mercury retrograde is most talked about out of the planetary retrogrades, I think, is because Mercury goes retrograde more often than any of the other planets, and for the shortest amount of time when it does. So, and that's due to the size of its orbit, the fact that it's the closest to the sun. Right now, actually, I'll put a link in the description, I found this interactive thing on timeanddate.com today, which is one of my favorite resources for all things astronomy, and then taking those things and relating them to astrology and my magic concerning the moon, Saturn, Mercury retrograde, whatever it is. So Time and Date is one of my favorite websites for that information, and I found this today, which I will link below, where you could see the distance of each planet from the sun and from the earth and from each other on any given day. And so you can look and see. And so right now, today, when I am making this video, it is March 26th, 2018, and Mercury happens to be the closest planet to Earth right now as well. Because I know I've heard people say that one of the reasons Mercury retrograde is such a big deal is because it's the closest to us. And whereas we know that that's not true all the time, because in the order of closeness to the sun, it's the sun, and then Mercury, and then Venus, and then Earth. But this little interactive thing on Time and Date helped me to see that Mercury, Venus, and Mars kind of switch in order, that at different times throughout the year, any one of those three planets could be the closest to Earth. So Mercury right now is the closest planet to Earth, as well as the closest planet to the sun. But yeah, so Mercury having a short orbit means that it goes retrograde more often and for a shorter amount of time. And what that means is it pretty much condenses the effect of it, so we're in and out of a Mercury retrograde relatively so quick that we really notice it for that week, 2 weeks. How long is it? Let me see. Let me consult my date book here. So Mercury went retrograde, or entered retrograde, on Thursday, March 22nd at 8:19 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's my time zone. And it will be retrograde until April 15th. So that's, let's say, 24 days, approximately. So a little over 3 weeks. And I found this chart from Cafe Astrology, which is one of my favorite astrology websites. I will link it below, but I'll also put it up on the screen here. I found this chart on Cafe Astrology that shows in symbolic form when all of the planets are going retrograde and when they're coming out of retrograde for this year. So you can see in the top row, which is Mercury, that Mercury enters and leaves retrograde 3 times throughout the year. The next row down is Venus. Venus goes retrograde once this year, and it lasts a little bit longer than a Mercury retrograde. And then you can see the larger planets that have a larger, wider orbit, further away from the sun, further away from Earth. They also are going to be retrograde for at least part of 2018, but they stay retrograde much longer, for months and months at a time. So this is my theory, that we don't tend to talk about what happens with Jupiter retrograde and Neptune retrograde and things like that because they last for so long. The effects aren't as noticeable because we have time to adjust to those effects, and we spend so much of each year in a retrograde of those planets before coming back out of it, as opposed to Mercury, we're in and out in less than a month, and it happens multiple times in the year. So that's just one of my theories. What do you guys think? Feel free to share in the comments. So this is the thing. Mercury retrograde doesn't usually affect my life personally in a huge way. Or at least, I don't tend to notice it. I don't tend to take a big notice of it. So what I've been talking to some people about the past few days is the idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy, where you expect that something is going to happen, and therefore, like, if you expect a bad situation, then expecting things to be negative means you only notice the negative things, and you kind of create that negative experience yourself by expecting that to be the case. So it is self-fulfilling. On the other hand, there is just the idea that, these things are always happening throughout our lives, whether we notice them or not, and maybe just being consciously aware of the existence of the thing, being consciously aware that Mercury has gone retrograde now, number of days ago, just noticing that means that maybe I'm noticing the ways that things are going wrong in my life. Maybe I'm more able to attribute those things, maybe these things happen all the time anyway, but since I happen to know that it's Mercury retrograde, now we're tempted to say, oh, it's because of Mercury retrograde, even though these things happen all the time. But yeah, so I've been obviously working with this moon sign date book this year, which I have a review of on my channel, and there's another video that was going to be coming to you this weekend, but in possible Mercury retrograde fashion, or possible just my bad luck with my technology in general, any time of year. So see, this is the thing where, like, is it Mercury retrograde? Is it not? These things happen, whether it is or not. Are we attributing it to this just because we know that this is what's happening at this time? But I digress. There's another video that was going to be coming this weekend that I had trouble getting up, and I tried to record it yesterday. It was going to actually be last month's last video, and so I'm thinking, technically it's finishing a project that I already had started, so it should be fine for Mercury retrograde, but it went wrong. I recorded the whole thing, but my camera, which is a flip cam, it has a real button for the record button. It actually clicks, click, click. The other buttons for zooming in and out and for, like, scrolling through the videos that are saved on the camera are touchscreen. So yesterday, when I hit record, I hit the record button, there's a red light so I can see that it is recording, and I recorded the whole video. It was about half an hour of footage, and then when I went to play it back, realized that apparently when I hit the record video and sat down, I must have grazed the zoom button. And this is weird, because normally you have to hold down the touchscreen button for it to continue to zoom in on the screen. But, I mean, I clicked the record button, and I let go, and I sat down. But it went ahead and zoomed itself all the way in the frame. So the video was going to look like this. I'm going to edit it so you can see. This is what it was going to look like. And I was like, I can't use that footage. So I had to redo it. But it was going to be about some other books that I read a couple months ago and I took some notes on. So you can look forward to that video in the future. I am going to be doing it. I talk about the 2016 edition of the Moon Sign book, which is the book that Llewellyn publishes, that this was supposed to be a date book version of. But if you see my review of this, you'll see that I was very disappointed in it. There's a lot of stuff lacking. And I have some insights now from seeing the 2016 edition of the Moon Sign book that I'm going to talk about in this other video, along with some other Wicca, witchcraft, paganism books that I looked at this library. But I couldn't do that video again today because the photos that I took of the books at the library so that I could put the covers up here for you to reference, those photos are on my cell phone, which also I now cannot access because yesterday the power button broke, and I was very silly and thought that taking out the battery and putting the battery back in would help, because sometimes if you just restart my phone, it'll fix whatever weirdness is wrong with it. But I couldn't restart the phone because the power button was broken, so I couldn't use it to restart the phone. So I took the battery out thinking that would work, not realizing that when I put the battery back in, that wasn't going to automatically turn the phone back on. And because the power button isn't working, yeah, I can't turn my phone on. There's nothing else wrong with my phone. It's fully charged, it's alive, it's not dead to the world, but I can't turn it on. So I can't access those photos. So you cannot see that video, even if I recorded it today. You can't see that video fully edited with the book covers until a later date. So I decided to do this video today, partially just to tell you all these crazy things that have been going on with my technology, and partially to have a discussion about Mercury retrograde. So what do you guys think? Do you tend to really notice the effects of planetary retrogrades, maybe specifically Mercury? Do you have any tips and tricks for people who are really heavily affected by it? Because like I said, I don't feel like I'm one of those people who is always really intensely affected by it. But for some reason the past few days, yeah, all of our technology has been being weird. Communication has been fine for me. Travel has been fine. I'm not making any big purchases. I'm not making any big plans. I'm not starting any projects. You all know I have a million unfinished projects lying around at any given time. I am happy to work on those during times like Mercury retrograde, and any other time I will work on finishing projects that have already begun. I am not starting anything new. And yeah, so for me it's just been the technology weirdness, which I know my technology is weird to begin with. I need some new technology in certain areas. I need to upgrade technology. I need to just, I don't know what it is, but yeah. So that's been the big thing for me. But again, so I don't know if that's able to be attributed to Mercury retrograde or not. I'm definitely not the kind of person to blame things on the planets. I do my Saturn Returns course, which I am, again, working on revamping so we can do it again this year, and it'll be a little bit new and improved. It'll last a little longer so we can have more of the material in there that I wanted to have. But you know, my Saturn Returns course that I do, that I've been doing the past year, is all about the fact that Saturn is not just a horrible planet that's here to ruin your life. There are really positive lessons to take from all of these things. So I'm not the kind of person who thinks that Saturn is bad news or that Mercury is bad news. I don't think the planets are just showing up to ruin our lives, okay? The planets are part of nature, and you know, sometimes when we talk about nature, we mostly talk about just planet Earth and the nature here on Earth. But the planets are part of the natural rhythms of life too, right? And the universe. And so I consider the name that I use for my higher power or the ultimate energy, whatever, is universal energy, or the energy of the universe, or the universe. The solar system is part of that. And so their rhythms and cycles are just as much a part of the natural cycles that we may or may not want to pay attention to in our practices as the sun and the moon are. You know, those are the the big ones that we deal with here living on Earth as inhabitants of this planet. But yeah, so I don't think of them as automatically being bad things. So I don't feel like for me it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where I see in my planner Mercury's going retrograde and I go, oh no, take all the precautions. You know, for me it's like yesterday, I had obvious trouble with my technology, so I took precautions today to make sure that that would not happen. I stood on the other side of my camera and hit record and let it go for 5 seconds to make sure it wasn't zooming itself in before walking around to this side and sitting down. That kind of precaution. That's just because I did a thing, or a thing happened yesterday that I want to take precautions against, but it's not because of Mercury necessarily. So, yeah, I don't blame Mercury for things, I don't blame the planets, but I also know that sometimes that's just something we can pay attention to, that maybe we're like, oh, this weird thing happened and it was kind of inconvenient, maybe it had something to do with Mercury. So let me know what you guys think. Also, in case you were wondering, I am drinking Equal Exchange peppermint tea today. I got my blue and blue and blue in honor of Mercury, because Sailor Mercury is blue, so I think of Mercury as being blue. Shout out Sailor Scouts! So I hope you're all having a good week and that crazy things aren't happening in your lives in general, not just during Mercury retrograde, but hope things are going well for you, and I will see you again next time. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.